Welcome to the special joint session between the 2020 Data Science Leadership Summit and the Academic Data Science Alliance annual meeting, which are online for the first time. I'm Meredith Lee, Executive Director and Co-Principal Investigator for the National Science Foundation West Big Data Innovation Hub, headquartered at UC Berkeley's new Division of Computing, Data Science, and Society. As Raghu mentioned, under the Obama administration, I led the White House Innovation for Disaster Response and Recovery Initiative and the launch of a data.gov community with phenomenally dedicated colleagues from federal government and partner organizations. The initiative grew in the wake of Hurricane Sandy to find the most effective ways technology can empower survivors, first responders, and local, state, tribal, territorial, and federal governments with critical information and resources. It's worth mentioning that the public-private partnerships, the commitments, and the relationships developed through the Innovation for Disaster Response and Recovery Initiative happened over many months and years, combining and expanding capabilities with sustainability in mind. From our stakeholders and deep engagement with the community in co-designing approaches, we knew all too well that in a crisis, the most useful technology is so often what you have already installed, verified, and stress tested well beforehand. Or it's likely an approach that doesn't add complexity or other stumbling blocks for individuals and organizations who are overwhelmed and stretched to their capacity. As our current pandemic extends, the rising demand for data and data-enabled analysis represent both a challenge and an opportunity, one that we are seeing so viscerally compounded with strain from hurricanes, fires, socioeconomic upheaval, and long overdue calls for systemic change. Especially for individuals and organizations looking to step up and contribute towards crisis response and recovery, perhaps for the first time, or perhaps more deeply than ever before. This session and the conversations to follow aim to surface key lessons learned, reflections, and critically important context. Our lightning talks begin with Dr. Nicolette Lewis-Saint, who is the Executive Director and President of Healthcare Ready, a 501c3 organization that focuses on strengthening the United States healthcare supply chain, preparedness, and response before, during, and after natural disasters, disease outbreaks, and catastrophic events. You may have seen her quoted in the recent Atlantic article focused on the pandemic in America, or perhaps you recognize her from the emergency COVID-19 town hall hosted by the NAACP. Whether in front of tens of thousands of people or in one-on-one conversations, Nicolette and her team are working tirelessly for patient needs and facilitating critical partnerships. Prior to her leadership role at Healthcare Ready, Nicolette served as the senior advisor to the US State Department's Special Coordinator for Ebola. This was during the height of the Ebola epidemic of 2014, and as she and I were both serving as AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows at the time, I can personally note how vital she was for coordinating international efforts and jumpstarting our diplomatic response. Earlier in her career, Nicolette served as a foreign affairs officer, advising US State Department leadership on issues related to public health, technology transfer, and biotechnology. She holds a PhD in pharmacology and molecular sciences from Johns Hopkins University, an MBA from the University of Baltimore, and currently serves on the FEMA National Advisory Council. Our second lightning talk will be from Dr. Ron Canetti, a professor of computer science at Boston University. His research interests span multiple aspects of cryptography and information security, with emphasis on the design, analysis, and use of cryptographic protocols. He is the director of the Center for Reliable Information Systems and Cybersecurity. Ron received his PhD from the Weizmann Institute of Science, was a researcher at the IBM T.J. Watson Research Center, a research scientist at MIT, and a professor at Tel Aviv University. He is a fellow of the International Association for Cryptologic Research, and an associate editor of the Journal of Cryptology and Information and Computation. You may have seen him mentioned in the press as one of a team of researchers at Boston University who developed a privacy-preserving, Bluetooth-enabled smartphone app algorithm for COVID-19 automatic exposure notification, which in part underlies the contact tracing technology jointly released by Apple and Google in April 2020. This technology, in turn, is now the substrate for exposure notification app development at the level of various states and countries. Next, we will hear from Dr. Emma Spiro, who is an associate professor in the Information School and Department of Sociology at the University of Washington, and a data science fellow at the UW eScience Institute. She received her PhD in sociology from UC Irvine and brings her background in applied mathematics and social networks to her work in computational social science. For over a decade, Emma has studied online communication and information-related behaviors in the context of emergencies and disaster events. Recently, she has focused on investigating misinformation online, and her lightning talk will note the creation of the Center for an Informed Public and recent NSF-funded efforts focused on the COVID-19 pandemic. Finally, our fourth lightning talk before we start the fireside chat features Dr. Lara Campbell, Director for the National Science Foundation Convergence Accelerator Program. The Convergence Accelerator is a new organizational structure and activity through the NSF Office of Integrative Activities designed to accelerate the transition of use-inspired convergence research into practice in areas of national importance. Lara brings a wealth of insight from not only her current role at NSF, but also prior roles facilitating international scientific collaboration and partnerships. Before joining NSF, she served as director of the nonprofit Kubrick Center for International Science and Technology Advancement, where she developed, managed, and supported programs that included efforts in cooperative biological threat reduction. Lara holds a BA in chemistry from Rice University, a PhD in synthetic, organic, and biochemistry from the University of Texas at Austin, and was a Fulbright Scholar. Along with my session co-chairs, Eric Kalachik and Jing Liu, we are grateful for our speakers and all for partaking today. We hope that through the topics raised in this session, that you are inspired to contribute, sensing a responsibility to our collaborators and to the broader public to support informed dialogue and action in concrete ways with transparency and accountability, with an understanding of what has been done already, and with an eye towards more sustainable, steady state infrastructure for the long tail of recovery. And hopefully with a culture of collaboration that leverages the capacity and creativity of existing networks, like the Moore Sloan Data Science Environments and the Academic Data Science Alliance, of our institutions and centers and the regional big data innovation hubs, of the hundreds and actually probably thousands of research and education investments that we are all connected to, and of the unique talents and perspectives from the community beyond this virtual room. Thanks for joining today, and we look forward to working together on next steps.
Hello, my name is Nicolette Lewis-Saint. I am the Executive Director of Healthcare Ready. Very glad to be with you all. I realize I only have a few minutes to talk about such a large and important topic, and I know many of my colleagues are using slides to walk through their concepts, but I'd actually like to just spend this time talking through a few core principles. As the COVID-19 response has been ongoing, and we're continuing to think about ways, especially in a pandemic response where we are constrained in the ways that we can physically work together, in the ways that we can actually be face-to-face, do some of the work that we would traditionally be able to do in person. The role of technology, the role of data science, the ways in which we need to bring speed in our analysis and our efficiency continue to surge in discussion. And so I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. But on the three principles that I'm thinking about right now, the first and foremost is what are the existing pieces of infrastructure? When we think about where we're going, what needs to happen to get us out of this pandemic, have we done a full assessment of the existing infrastructure that exists, whether it is within the healthcare sector or other related sectors? What infrastructure is currently in place that can allow for us to build off of it, or figure out ways to adjust and modify it in ways that help us to get towards our desired goal? And from my view, I think that's a very important vantage point to bring to this conversation, because there have been a lot of discussions, especially in the mitigation side, some of the built infrastructure, built environment conversations about resilient infrastructure side that actually have made advances that would be particularly helpful, especially for our public health partners. So that's one principle that I urge you to keep in mind as this meeting is ongoing. The second is really to think about what it looks like to ease burden. So a lot of the challenge that we're seeing right now across the different components of the pandemic response pertain to what it looks like for people to be stretched. We're dealing with stretched healthcare systems, stretched supply chains, stretched public health departments. And so anything that adds additional burden, whether that is an uptake, technical assistance and training, having to socialize a new tool in a way that makes it easier for people to figure out how to use it, or even just the time to have a conversation with a new partner, it's going to be viewed as burdensome. So that's, again, where we have to kind of loop back to what we knew before and really think through what exists already and how can that be the springboard for how we move forward. From my vantage point, I think that's incredibly important when we're thinking about, for example, innovations that can speed contact tracing, what it looks like to illuminate portions of the supply chain, how we can create efficiencies in healthcare management that could make it easier to be able to better identify potential COVID positive patients in an emergency department and quickly isolate them and move them to areas for triage and potential treatment that prevent them from being exposed to greater populations. And as we get further into this year with flu season and hurricane seasons and wildfires going, that burden is growing. So the ways in which we are thinking about efficiency also have to think about efficiency and uptake. And then the final is just remembering that we do have a certain amount of uncertainty. There's a great deal that we do not know, still is remaining to be learned, things that are still remaining to be decided. And whatever we create now has to be able to adapt to that environment. We are in a phase where we are moving through vaccine trials for potential vaccines. There are clinical trials that are also going on for potential therapeutics of COVID. There are other threats, I've mentioned a few of them earlier, that are also going on at the same time. We're still very much in the midst of the response. But the reality is that we know that this is the pandemic that is impacting us today. For those of us who have been in the emergency management and disaster response space, we've looked at a range of threats, and we know that because COVID is happening now does not mean that we are prevented from seeing any of those other potential disasters. So we really have to think about where we are, where we need to go, and not just make it so focused on one particular event that it prevents our ability to actually be prepared for all of the potential events that we may see. Those potential events could be biological threats, they could be chemical threats. There are a range of other things that could actually strain the systems that we may grow to rely on, strain our ability to rely on technology and innovation in a consistent way, especially on the ground if we're talking about potential disruptions in power, to potential disruptions in just connectivity to other parts of the healthcare system. And from my vantage point, that's why the all hazards approach is so important. So again, I'm really glad to know that this conversation is happening and to be with you all at this time, but wanted to just leave a few principles for your consideration, and very much looking forward to the discussion. Again, thank you for having me. Take care.
I'm Ron Kennedy, and I'm a cryptographer by training, and but I've been working over the last several years extensively with law scholars to try to understand how law and algorithms and cryptography and computer science can understand each other so as to allow laws that better make use or better understand algorithms and cryptography in order to, better the society and how to develop algorithms that better society. And naturally, when I heard like in March about the different contact tracing mechanisms that some countries have been using in order to stop the pandemic, I got very interested, and together with some colleagues, we specifically Ari Trachtenberg and Mayank Varia from BU, we were working on, we kind of developed to design ideas on how to do contact tracing automated on a phone in a privacy preserving, decentralized way, so as to, of course, help society, to get over this pandemic quickly. So we've been working on this for the last 6 months, and it's been a rocky road. Little did I know, and little did I appreciate the difficulties that are on the way to getting such a thing actually used. It looked like a great technical, simple technical idea that could really make a difference, and it might very well be, but it really is complicated. And the reason is, well, there are many reasons, and like which I learned to appreciate as time goes on. So in fact, it's a multi-level problem, and which is complicated on all levels. So first, even given that we have an ideal system, so it's not clear what there's no agreement in society and what are the goals are. Right? I mean, there are different factions of society that have different objectives in what to do with the pandemic. Do we want to let everybody know, or do we want to quarantine everybody? Do we want to sacrifice the economy in order to save lives, and which lives? So this is a really complicated social problem that goes way beyond, of course, technology. So it's not clear what is the goal, right? This is very different than what we are used to. So having a clear goal in mind and then designing a system that satisfies these goals. So the goals are not completely clear and debatable. And even further, the goals themselves, the social goals, the social benefit depends on the system that we build, right? So if we build system in one way, it may lead to to different one type of success, and we build another way different type of success. And in some sense, we have to think when we develop the system on how this will change society in some way, right? So we cannot think of goals and something fixed. We have to think about an evolving system, social and technological system together, and have to think about the system as something that moves this system in one way or the other, whatever we develop. So this makes this process of working with people's data and while preserving one functionality on the one hand and privacy on the other hand, really complicated when it's not clear where people want to go, what is important, what is not important. Of course, there's also this other issues that intervene, and this is that any system that you develop can always be abused together differently than what you intend. So having a system that is not completely foolproof is going to be disastrous, not just for the particular context that you want to use it in, but also could have long-term bad ramifications later on if the system is adopted. And furthermore, it can have long-term ramifications about people's trust in technology in general. So this is a very, very delicate and kind of like dangerous area. I want us to move very carefully, and that is something that I did not appreciate at all when I started this off. Um, so maybe I want to end in a story that I keep being reminded of. In the early 60s, there was a debate at the Technion, which was then the Israeli Institute of Technology. That's where I did my undergraduate, but much after the 60s. There was a debate about whether to start a Department of Humanities, even though it was a technological institute. There were budget constraints, and people said, why do we need to waste money on humanities department? So one of the professors there did an experiment. So he took some of the applicants to Technion and gave them an exam. And the exam was entrance exam, was one question. Your goal is to design a pipe that will transmit blood from Haifa to Tel Aviv, and it gave some parameters, and people, students asked all kinds of questions. Our design came up with all kinds of designs, but in the end, he failed all of them because none of the students and none of the solution asked the question, why is it that you need to pipe to transfer blood from Haifa to Tel Aviv? And I think that's a very important point to remember. And by the way, the Technion today does have a humanities department. And that's, I felt over the last 6 months many times like I was designing such a pipeline, and I was trying to think to myself, should I do it, and how should, why am I doing this? So that's it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Spiro. Thank you to our panel organizers for inviting me to participate in this great event. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the challenge of misinformation during crisis events. This is something my team and I have been working on at the University of Washington for a very long time now, and we've learned a lot. And I want to talk a little bit about what I see as potentially the role of data science in this space, but also just to give you a sense of what we've learned over the past few years. So we approach this, I am a social scientist by training. We approach this problem by looking at rumoring behavior, which has a long history in the social sciences. We want to think about how people are trying to make decisions during non-routine situations like crisis events. And so we think about this process as one of collective sense making, a group coming together, trying to make sense of an unfolding and a very uncertain situation. One of the really important things about our work is that we recognize that sometimes this kind of informal communication, rumoring, misinformation actually does have a social function. It can help relieve anxiety and fill information voids. So clearly, the misinformation is a problem during crisis events, and this is unsurprising, right? A heightened uncertainty that we see in the crisis context really makes it so this situation is ripe for misinformation. And in this particular context as well, the prevalence and spread of misinformation and disinformation can have severe consequences, including loss of life and other things that hamper our ability to respond to crisis events. So we want to focus on how the crisis information space can be a target of strategic information operation campaigns and think about the consequences of that vulnerability. So what have we learned? What are we already learning about this problem, and where can we go from here? I want to talk about three things today. One is the language that we use for talking about these problems, right? I've already used the terms rumor, misinformation, disinformation. We need to be really careful about the words we use because of the assumptions that are carried along with those words. How information spread, who spreads it, why, what solutions are possible. You were probably already thinking about all those things when I was saying the terms rumor, misinformation, disinformation. It's also really important to recognize that we are all vulnerable to misinformation, every one of us. And finally, that misinformation and disinformation spread on social media and online specifically versus where we focus a lot of our attention are participatory phenomena. They involve us, we have to participate. And finally, I'll talk at the end about some ideas for computational approaches, but these rarely work in isolation. So we're all vulnerable to misinformation. One of the early cases that we studied here was discourse surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement for Black Lives. We looked on Twitter to look at who is sharing others' content. So here you see a visualization of retweet networks on Twitter, looking at who retweets whose content. You see a very clearly left-leaning and right-leaning or pro-BLM and anti-BLM clusters here. But when we were doing this work, we discovered that Twitter recently released a set of accounts that were associated with the Internet Research Agency in Russia. These were accounts that they had taken off the platform because of their spread of misinformation and disinformation. And so we recognized some of these accounts and thought, where do they appear in our clusters? We went in not really knowing, but some people might have a sort of preconceived notion of where you expect to see these accounts on which side of this discourse. As it turns out, in line with my, I guess, larger picture of we're all vulnerable here, we saw this on both sides, right? So this was already a polarized conversation, but these accounts were very happy to go in there and pull this conversation apart even further. It's not just one-sided, it's not just super partisan. The other thing I said is misinformation is participatory. It relies on us to spread. So one of the things our team has been working on lately is to look at how to sort of peel back the layers of how misinformation spreads on social media and how it becomes sort of viral, how it goes viral. So we look at reshares of content, and this visualization is showing the effect of people with very large audiences sharing particular content. You can see here along the bottom on the x-axis, this particular Medium post, which has a lot of misleading information surrounding COVID, didn't really go anywhere until some really big names decided to share this message, right? So misinformation relies on us to spread it, right? In particular, the dynamics of attention in these online platforms can have significant effects. I've been talking about most of this in terms of misinformation. It's really, really difficult to determine intent. And intent is one of the things we use to distinguish misinformation as false information from disinformation as intentionally false information. So we've sort of come to the conclusion that only by looking at the larger information ecosystem, the social network, the dynamic behavior, the attention that we see, can you really identify strategic information operations at a larger scale. Right? It's very clear to see that what might start out as disinformation can become misinformation as sort of unwitting, unknowing subjects like us share that content as well. And finally, I said that misinformation strikes at our emotions, right? If we go online, we see headlines, that headline makes you feel really good or really bad. Make sure it's not too good or too bad. We can think about how this information, this content really does try to speak to and engage our emotions to share. And it's really important to understand here that in many cases, disinformation specifically isn't trying to convince us of things, it's trying to confuse us, create muddled thinking. And this is a really, really important aspect of the phenomenon that we can't understate, right? The goal of these activities is to undermine our general trust in information and the social institutions that we rely on. So what is the role of data science? So here at the University of Washington, our team has been working with a lot of different mixed methods approaches to this work. And we use data science methods all the time to help us with this kind of exploration. We use things to detect or correct false information. We could think about the role of early warning systems to identify things that are spreading disproportionately, perhaps to the evidence or perhaps to other factors. We might want to identify these outsized attention dynamics, right? Where do we see people becoming really popular or content becoming really popular, whereas it hadn't been so popular in the past? And of course, one of the keys for doing this is to facilitate data access and sharing. Unfortunately, in our own space, a lot of the data that we could make use of or need to use to explore these dynamics is owned by corporations, and we have no or very limited access to it. This is really important because a lot of the companies control the search and personalization algorithms that can make this a significant problem. And we're learning more and more how these algorithms are subject to manipulation. And finally, we have, of course, the challenge of synthetic media as well. Going forward, we're going to see a lot more of this, I would suspect, going forward. So we're doing a lot of work here at the University of Washington. I just wanted to point out specifically our Center for an Informed Public, which is a newly founded research unit here at the University of Washington. We're trying to tackle this problem of strategic misinformation, and a lot of our work falls within the realm of crisis events. That's what we've been working on for over a decade. So hopefully this sort of brief lightning talk got some of the gears turning in your head. think about these problems, think about the fact that we're all vulnerable, think about the fact that we really need to be careful with our language, and that a lot of this phenomenon really does try to incite particular kinds of emotions. Really looking forward to some of the discussions that will come from this meeting, and brainstorming the place and approaches that we can use data science techniques. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Campbell, and I'm from the National Science Foundation. I'm really honored to be here and to have a chance to talk with you about how we can build collaborations and partnerships that improve our society and hopefully also enable the kinds of relationships and infrastructures that can help facilitate the rapid responses to catastrophes and many other social goods. As I think Meredith already mentioned, I'm from the National Science Foundation, and the NSF is a federal agency that provides about 25% of the overall federal spending on basic research across all disciplines. And in fields such as computer science, mathematics, and the social sciences, NSF is actually the major source of federal support, providing more like 80% of the federal basic research funding. I'm sure that this audience is relatively familiar with the National Science Foundation's Directorate for Computer and Information Sciences and Engineering, but you may not know that all of the directorates and divisions within NSF are very interested in data science. You really can't have science without data, and the integration and sharing of data is important in absolutely every discipline. The link on this slide has examples of 9 broad themes or drivers of data science, but there are honestly too many specific solicitations and calls relevant to data science to share them all on one slide. So having made my pitch for you to consider applying to NSF to support whatever your data science interests are, I now want to tell you about a new program that is attempting to address some of the challenges of integration, collaboration, and rapid response that are at the core of today's topic. So I work for a new program at NSF, the Convergence Accelerator, which seeks to speed the transition of convergence research into practice to address challenges of national importance. Building an accelerator capability within NSF is a very new thing, although we're proud to be building on the expertise of other transition to practice programs and, of course, innovation activities at NSF. The vision we have is that a convergent approach that integrates different disciplines and their approaches and methods is what's needed to address the most vexing of societal and technical challenges. And in order to bring those solutions actually into practical use, we have to enable partnerships that include industry, nonprofits, academia, community organizations, state, local, and federal governments, and of course, any other sectors that encompass the end users that truly need and will use tools. So without those partnerships, you can't hope to really build impactful tools. The structure of our program is that we have new tracks, new topics every single year, and those are community proposed and developed. We have a very accelerated time frame for our work, which is also a bit unusual within a basic research funding agency. The first phase is a very large planning grant that provides an opportunity to build partnerships and flesh out the planned deliverables, and then a short 2 years to actually deliver on that impact. The tracks to date are very data science related, although we are not technically a data science program. There's a lot of data science going on. And I just want to point out that the phase 2 awards, our first phase 2 awards that we've just made, these are $5 million awards for 2 years of effort. They are, all of them have a bit of a focus on COVID because COVID was happening as they were preparing their awards. So very interesting stuff there. You should check out our website. And one of those projects, one of the Open Knowledge Network projects, is working on flooding and better data around flooding. So that's super interesting. And of course, the future of work has completely changed in our COVID situation. The other thing I want to mention to you is that we have workshops happening right now for topics that will be selected for 2021, and we anticipate putting out a call for ideas this fall for the next round of ideas. So look for that and give us your ideas. The website is there. All right, so now to drill deeper into the topic of this session. NSF, like many federal agencies, received some generous funding as part of the COVID-19 stimulus package, and we spent those funds and much more to make more than 700 rapid response awards across the entire foundation. And one of my brilliant colleagues, Triton Burrow, pointed out that we've used the rapid mechanism a lot in response to Katrina, in response to Zika, and previously we've funded some really excellent research, but each one of those projects has been isolated. So he had the idea that we should have some sort of data commons or some sort of way of sharing information across all of the projects so that they could be more interconnected. So we made one single award out of the 700 to create the COVID Information Commons, which is supported by NSF's Big Data Innovation Hubs. We made the award in May. By July, there was already a website up, and it has provided a really fantastic way of getting a holistic view of everything that we funded, but more importantly, providing an opportunity for collaboration so that different groups can find each other and can network, plus some super fun visualization tools. So this has grown to be not just a good platform for sharing information, but as I said, a tool for collaboration. I really recommend their webinar series. It's also lightning talk format, so you can get a lot of great information without too much time investment. But now the question is, how can we do this more and better to make sure it has a more enduring impact? So one idea that's already come up is to expand to include awards from other agencies and other organizations so it can be more comprehensive. We've talked about maybe a research collaboration network, but we need your ideas. Like, what should this become and how can it be more impactful? Which then leads to thinking of the future. So fond as I am of the rapid mechanism for supporting research efforts, it's still after the fact. Like, we make those awards after there's already a challenge. So a more proactive mechanism is the Research Coordination Network path to provide support for networks, and ExcelNet, which is a complementary network of networks funding opportunity within the International Office. But unfortunately, those both just support networking, not actual research. And I think the biggest challenge that we need to work on is our culture of silos and isolation. We need to much more aggressively connect researchers and creators and holders of data with the users and the stakeholders who need and would take advantage of those tools. And that's certainly a challenge that my program is working on, but we need your help to sort of institutionalize a culture of collaboration outside of our silos. And of course, we can't think of the US in isolation. We have to connect with our global colleagues. So I look forward to more discussions and hope to learn a lot from all of you. Thank you very much.
So welcome to the panel portion of our session. As Meredith has framed in her opening comments, the COVID-19 pandemic has surfaced a whole spectrum of data science challenges and opportunities. It's afforded us myriad demonstrations for our successes, but also our current limitations. This joint session of the ADSA annual meeting and the Data Science Leadership Summit is intended to serve as a launching point for partnership commitments and future coordination to establish more mechanisms for data science rapid response from crises. In order for us to succeed in this direction is going to really require extensive and broadly inclusive discussion, incorporating not only data science leadership and expertise, but really also parallel representation from a variety of other domains, both across academia and industry and in coordination with all levels of government. So to initiate that, we're shifting gears here now to this panel portion. We're hoping to run it in kind of a fireside chat. Again, let me echo Meredith's thanks to all of you for joining us. To set context, our interest here is less about data science technical details and actually more about how best to go about strengthening our infrastructure and responding to challenges, be they around policy, organization, logistics, privacy, human resources. So what I'm going to do here is sort of walk us through a handful of questions. I'm looking for the panel simply to reflect, engage, discuss together and whatnot. So starting with the first one, reflecting on the current COVID crisis, but drawing maybe more generally from your broader perspective on previous emergencies and disasters, what strengths and weaknesses do you feel have been revealed in terms of contributions of data scientists to the larger response effort and their coordination with it. And I have in mind anything from, say, our technical capabilities, what went well, what didn't, to allocation of research resources or talent, to collaboration or communication with other components of the effort.
Sure, I'm happy to start if that's helpful. Thank you first for having me. Really glad that you all are having this conversation. I think it's very important. Um, so I think while the data science has grown and accelerated, I think a big part of what we've seen during COVID has been the recognition that our policies may not always be prepared to catch up to the science. And I think what is very unique about COVID has been the dependence on data science and technology in a way that other disease outbreaks may not have required because of the pathology of COVID, the infectiousness of the actual virus. And so that has created a dependence that our policies weren't necessarily prepared to keep up with, but also recognizing that the strain, if you will, that public health departments, for example, saw and others prohibited them from being able to actually be more forward thinking and reaching to some of their natural academic partners or to find those innovations, just recognizing that in the current environment, they were not able to do so. And I think that for me is a big lesson learned and a big takeaway, then also speaks to the fact that a lot of this previous work on data public health infrastructure that was underway before COVID, had been in place and had we actually funded some of those opportunities to really build this infrastructure in a way that would have eased the burden on especially individuals who were already stretched, we probably would have been able to absorb more technology and been able to use a lot more data more quickly.
Maybe if I can build on what Nicolette said there, I think the other interesting aspect of that is that in many ways, the public and the pandemic itself has put sort of science out of its comfort zone and asked for research and results much faster than science typically likes to work. And we see this a lot with some of the work we're doing at the University of Washington, where people are putting out preprints and people are putting out science that hasn't been vetted by our sort of traditional systems. And then it gets picked up on social media and other outlets and really does reach a large proportion of the population with potentially damaging or results that might be misinterpreted in certain ways. So in some ways, policy wasn't ready for the science, but also we weren't ready. The public is sort of demanding of science, something that we are uncomfortable doing a lot of ways. And so we need to figure out how we can align those two things where we do have the data to support policy decisions and support public health initiatives, but we also need to make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves and think about how the public is reacting to some of those things.
I completely agree with everything you've both said. I think, also I have to say, I'm speaking only for myself, not for the federal agency that I represent, the National Science Foundation. These are only my own opinions. I'm sure that's true for everyone, but I'm sort of a glasses half full person. So I was really impressed by the way researchers, data scientists, and just the public in general have stepped up and have tried to do whatever they can do. So from my perspective, the biggest challenge has been the coordination and communication part of it. So everyone's hungry for this research data, so they jump on these preprints. Everybody wants the data about, well, who's infected where and what can I do to protect myself and how can we're just hungry for everything. And so we've been grabbing at straws and threads, and we don't have that kind of exercised connectivity that Nicolette was talking about, so that there's a place where we would know to turn at this point.
I wanted to add another kind of aspect to that. So from my point of view, perspective of attempting to get automatic contact tracing, as we called it in the beginning, and then we switched to exposure notification to distinguish the two over the past few months. So was, again, it's a good side and a bad side. It was a tremendous recognition that this concept of privacy and personal privacy both in the sense of hiding information and the sense maybe more traditional legal sense of control over your actions and what happens to you was really played a major part in the pandemic, and specifically in this area of contact tracing, trying to detect who infected whom, and which we know is a major factor in this pandemic. And this collecting of information, which looks a priori as a simple thing, and it could be a simple thing technically, turned out to be a real nightmare. And for most part, because of this, the people were really concerned about their privacy. And I think the systems and the information systems, on all levels, did not take this into consideration, like in an appropriate way, both from the policy levels, the trust mechanism, the healthcare management level, and of course from the technical level of what the solutions should entail. And we've seen it all over the map, from manual phone call contact tracing that hit brick walls of silence, and more than that, and also in the trying to adapt and to accept this automated, cell phone based or whatever mechanisms. So I think, we have to learn, from this going forward, that any future, public data science that has to do definitely with health of people, but in general regarding private information of people, must take this into account, that people actually do care a lot about their privacy and their control. And even when there is a clear societal benefit in giving up, a little bit of personal privacy and control, people don't do it. And because in the end we're people, and we need to think those things through. And I think it's a very complicated mechanism of trade-off, and how to do it in a way that both preserves individual freedom and social benefit. It is something that also changes a lot between country and country, culture and culture, and the issue of trust in government. And this is a place where technology actually plays a main goal. It's not just implementing something that exists; that creates something new. That technology can create the medium that maybe, or the mechanism or the environment where this leads to either a good outcome or bad outcome overall. And this is in a sense part of data science, right? It's not just what to do with the data; it's how to collect it and create it in a good way.
Great.
If I can build on that just for a second, Eric, and I think, as a social scientist who operates in the area of data scientists, I see this a lot in that we often go in and sort of think about how can technology or data science solve a particular problem, and we don't think it necessarily about the communities that we're working with. And so, as Laura said, that one of the really things that's come out in the sort of COVID case is that there's been all these efforts to produce data. There's maybe less coordination of that data, but I think there's also fewer efforts to really co-create that data with the communities in these sort of very localized contexts. And we need to recognize that some of these communities might not want to be made visible by some of these data and statistics. And at the same time, from operating in the area of crisis management and crisis informatics for a very long time, we know that having good data after a crisis has very long-term impacts. Long-term impacts in terms of response as well as recovery in some of these communities. So it's sort of critical to be able to produce really good data. At the same time, you want to be really careful and try to work with the communities. And I think this is one place where there's a lot of room for growth in terms of working with local governments as well as other kind of trusted sources of information, right? It might be that we have to get creative here and not think about the traditional sources of data, but think about things like libraries as a trusted institution, and how can they go in and work with community organizations to co-create data that does represent the community and holds to that community's values.
Great. Thank you all for sharing on this. I'm going to nudge us towards the question of networks. We talked, I heard a number of you mention connectivity or networks or whatnot. It's been posed that while we have public health networks, we have healthcare provider networks, we have government networks, and while I don't think anyone can say the data science community has not stepped up and put tremendous effort and energy, that nonetheless, partially by almost by definition of the culture and who we are, we don't really operate necessarily with the level of networks and connectivity that some of these other organizations do. So let me ask you, in an ideal world, if we did try and move towards a data science rapid response network that would incorporate data scientists, data science organizations, and it could contribute rapidly and effectively in crisis moments in conjunction with other networks, what would that look like? What are key components, right? I mean, we're not asking to come up with it in 5 minutes altogether here. We'll give 10, right? No. But you know, what sort of leaps out at you as to sort of, well, you know, it would really be important that we have this or we address that?
I'd be really happy to start us off on that. I think that the key thing is flexibility and adaptability, right? So just as Emma and Nicolette were saying, and Ron as well, like you have to have these relationships that already exist so that you turn to them when you have a challenge. But the next challenge is going to be different. Even as we move from response to recovery, the people that you need to talk to and the questions you'll be asking them will be different. So we need networks that can grow organically, but that already have a foundation of relationships built so that you have an infrastructure there to turn to when you need it.
Yeah. So to build on that, or to continue with my previous point, I think in any collection of data, we should make sure to keep you know, the people, you know, in the driver's seat, and to allow them to decide and to whether they want to get the data and how to get the data, and also, if possible, to stop. You know, sometimes it's not feasible, it's not possible, but to make them understand and appreciate and trust that they control the contribution of the data, and this is critical to collecting good data, and you know, etc. And this is actually a place where you know, I think in my experience for the last few months, that academia actually is in a good position. You know, it actually, there were surveys over and over, and people trust academia more than government and more than industry. It's definitely, you know, Google, Apple, information industry to do the right thing with their data. This is actually and if you think about it, also makes sense, right? And I think, you know, we should build on that.
I think in many ways what Ren is highlighting there is that, excuse me, you need to have the right stakeholders in the network, right? So you have to have, and sort of like across all levels as well. You know, one of the things I think contact tracing has really been a really interesting case in this current context we live in, because there's a lot of really interesting technical solutions, and then you got to bring people who are really privacy and policy experts to the table as well. And I think that we often just don't have that right combination of people at the table when some of these big decisions or efforts are being put together. And it's challenging to find all those right stakeholders, especially as Lara said, and to build those connections prior to events. Right? You know, one of the things we've learned in the crisis context, people don't start building new networks and really, you know, using new tools and technologies after crisis. They go back to the things that they have already had. It's, you know, the personal relationships that they had previous to, the tools that they're familiar and know how to use. And so we need to keep that in mind.
I would also, I agree with everything that's been said. I would also caution against creating new mechanisms before we do the full exploration of determining A, what already exists, and B, what needs to be integrated into existing mechanisms. And I say that specifically because we should think about data science both as a standalone resource, but also a mechanism as it pertains to how data science enables other existing functions to be able to move forward with greater accuracy, efficiency, and probably safety in the issue of a pandemic. And with that in mind, I find myself thinking about all of the various components of a public health response that have existing networks and mechanisms that could benefit from having a greater data science integration that may not necessarily be able to plug in to a standalone network. And so I wonder about being able to create that network that enables resources, coordination, technical assistance for data scientists, but really being able to really integrate data science into the existing networks and infrastructure as opposed to creating a standalone.
Absolutely.
Ooh, Nicolette, I love that so much. And at the National Science Foundation, we actually have funding streams that allow networks to coordinate with other networks. And of course, we love supporting wheels that already are built and rolling. And so it's really kind of a challenge on all of us to do that step now or whenever we can to find out what is already out there, because we don't need to build a bunch of new wheels.
Yeah. I want to say to add to that, I think that we don't know what the new pandemic, next pandemic is going to be like, but the one thing that we do know that it is going to require coordination, but by many different players, right? In academia, many different academic disciplines, so I see from this contact tracing, it's supposed to be the simplest thing, but required people understanding people, epidemiology, from HVAC experts and whatever radio frequency experts and different in the hardware of Bluetooth and other communication mechanisms, and of course privacy protocol, etc. So you really need it takes a village, right? And it also takes a village in the sense that we need to keep open channels between people in academia, in government, in industry. And I think this is where, from my experiences the last few months, this is actually where things were slower. So there were contacts, of course, way beyond what we would expect because we are in a pandemic, but still it is taking so long to get people to agree on what to do in different levels of government and industry and academia. And if we had those channels and set, that would make things so much easier in the future.
Wonderful. And I love the pivot that we've taken here towards a network that's not simply standalone, but really is networked with other networks. I think if we look at what we have resource, particularly investments by both within academia and also across industry and the government funding agencies, we have an enormous amount of investments in things like regional clouds and hubs, institutes. Most major R1 universities have major data science institutes. We have centers. And of course, there's been a huge investment in data science education for the last 10 years. So it seems like at some level, the resources to some reasonable extent are there within this data science portion of the hub. And as some of you were alluding to, we certainly have been investing in creating data science as a broad sort of umbrella that by definition is empowering and interacting with other disciplines and entities. I'm wondering if we might try and ask ourselves, going back to Nicolette's point, what are examples that are perhaps, ideals that we might aim for, or cases that we might study that have already shown themselves to work well, maybe not in full-scale disaster mode, but maybe in a smaller disaster, maybe not even in a disaster, but what are directions that we might look to for examples as we broaden this discussion?
So years ago, I worked with cooperative threat reduction programs that were funded by the Department of Defense and Department of State, looking at ways to consider what are, pandemics are going to happen. A big push there in those programs was worrying about nefarious introduction of disease, but realizing that that would be a small case. And most of the time when disease happens, it's just natural occurring. And so regardless, you need to have relationships in place and communication infrastructures in place so that whatever happens, whatever disease outbreak occurs, people know who to talk to. And that was really extremely focused on government infrastructures internationally and domestically. And so one of the things that I see as a challenge is the connection between academia and with the for-profit, non-for-profit, the non-academic side. And I'm sure our colleagues can build on that.
So I'm aware that the Center for Disaster Medicine and Public Health and the Natural Hazard Center have been, out of Colorado, have been working together actually to create a data repository of sorts and a similar network to be able to allow for that type of partnership, collaboration, and information sharing. I actually think it's harder to figure out where the intersection point should be than it is to stand up the individual networks. And so I've long been interested in thinking through, you know, that resource that the those two groups are creating. How does that blend into what's happening on the cooperative threat reduction side? And the other part that we have to be very honest about is that we've thought about this while under what we've called an all hazards framework. We've not thought about this in an all hazards way. So it's also not very clear to me how easily we'll be able to adjust when we are thinking about a pandemic versus a chemical or biological attack versus a natural disaster. And I think that could be one of our other vulnerabilities here.
Yeah, and I just, I'm speaking out of term a little bit, sorry, I'm good at interrupting, is to mention then there are these academic resources that are already supported, like the big data hubs. So we do have these data infrastructures that are trying to do that thing that Nicolette just mentioned, sort of across all hazards or all kinds of data. So that's everything from, you know, astronomy through flooding. So how can we make those kinds of tools more flexible and adaptable? Because I feel like the big data hubs, although they absolutely have connections to industry and community groups, those relationships are probably not as strong as they are to academic groups.
Mm-hmm.
So another aspect, I think, going back to privacy and the individual's concerns, is I think it's trust in the system. That how much do individuals trust in that the system will do what it's supposed to do, what the people are told that the system is doing, etc. And I think, of course, this trust changes a lot between country to country, community to community, place to place. So it's not that I have any idea or panacea how to resolve it, but I think it should be on the table. We should understand it. For instance, we've been talking to people from manual contact tracing to try to understand their hardships. And I remember this person that was doing actually physical contact tracing in a community which was community, a mixed community, different racial ethnicities. And the person was saying, I was calling them and I was telling them, look, this is just for contact tracing. This is not for anything else. Please help me. And we were asking him, a bunch of cryptography security people on the call. How do you know this is the case? I mean, you say that and you mean that, but there have been cases where those things have been subpoenaed later and used for different, by ICE or other reasons, right? So things like that, how do we deal with that, right? So maybe we need some legal systems, some legal protection, some way of how to, in the society, the legal part to deal with, data that has to do with such emergencies. I think maybe this is U.S. centric, but we are in the U.S. So yeah, maybe to learn from other countries.
I like that, Ron. Like we need something like the Good Samaritan law or that feeling, so that if people do share personal data in order to support something like contact tracing, it doesn't come back to then result in them being, thrown out of the country or whatever bad outcome they would want to avoid with their data.
Right. And we need people to trust that this is happening.
Right. Trust is at the core of everything.
Right. Right.
I feel like I've also seen the flip side of that from the Good Samaritan point of view, right? You have so many volunteers who've come forward. We've seen aggregate groups post websites, say, if you need our help. As I look at those, I've also always had the thought too that, say a good, well-intentioned individual decides to try and contribute to an effort, and the city says, great, we'd like to engage you. Doesn't work out for some reason, despite everyone's well intentions. Where is there sort of guidance and infrastructure, the quality control, if you wish, where would that come from?
I would love to start with this one because this is a classic emergency management problem. And oftentimes we hear emergency managers say the time to exchange business cards is not during the disaster. And they're talking about the one-on-ones, but that's actually a part of the problem. And oftentimes, if you take this out of data science for a second and you look at just what it looks like to stand up ad hoc partnerships during a disaster, that is in fact the difficulty. And that's why we can't just wait until the event to figure out how we do all of this work and then really stand up these mechanisms that are supposed to be actual supports, because you don't have the opportunity to make sure there's trust. As all of my co-panelists have said, trust is a critical part of it. You don't have the QA QC, you don't have the opportunity for standards, and you don't have any type of mechanism for what happens if something doesn't work or doesn't meet expectations. And frankly, when you stand up an ad hoc group, it can go away without accountability. So those accountability measures are important as well. That's why we can't wait until the actual event. But that's also why, and I say this recognizing that, when we're saying institutions in academia, that means something different, but having institutions, trusted organizations, established networks, that doesn't mean that they have to have R1s. That doesn't mean that they have to be at a certain revenue level. It's not that type of thing, which is often the measure for private sector or NGO or academic partners. It's more about having processes of accountability, having demonstrated capabilities, having an ability to actually create a process where there is review, assessment, feedback, and pre-established processes for how they're going to coordinate and work with one another. And I think the thing about, what we're talking about specifically in this context is if we don't do that, we actually run the risk, when you are talking about a rapidly evolving situation, of creating solutions that are outdated because they were 48 hours prior to new information coming out, or the needs have shifted and the demographics have shifted, and so we haven't had the ability to adjust. But if you have those trusted networks, you can also set up flows of information to make sure that even sensitive information or information that's in the process of being reviewed and fully vetted and hasn't been made public yet can flow alongside that. And I think that, to me, is what's being called out for here, is that type of a channel and mechanism that is stood up and then maintained and then can be expanded during an event, not just created.
Absolutely. So we have about 5 more minutes left. I think what I'd like to maybe do is just say, what did we not talk about? What is it that leaps to your mind that you'd like to say, oh, before we leave, here's one other aspect?
So if I, as I'm listening to Nicolette talk there, I think one thing that jumped to mind for me is, especially in the area of data science, and not just specific to COVID, but more broadly, there's a whole wealth of data that's locked within industry. And I see this a lot in my own work because I deal a lot with social media data and just the data that could be available on human mobility or migration or who people are spending time with, right? That data is really locked. And so I think we need to think about how a partnership might work in that situation, and how we might be able to build sort of pre-existing relationships such that when something happens, we can use that data for our data science efforts for response and recovery. So to me, I think that's one of the real challenges here, is that there's so much data, especially on, that's near and dear to my heart, and sort of this misinformation on social media space that just we don't have visibility into, we don't have access to. It's really challenging to work in this space.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, it goes back to the issue of who controls the data, people's data. I mean, in the legal way, in the industry, in practice, so some data, if you think of data is the new oil, so maybe it's a social benefit. The data will be out there, and you know, whatever is accessible to all. But again, this issue of privacy. So to think about data in a more broad sense of you know, of a societal you know, tokens, the societal tokens of benefit, and how to manage it in the best of ways. And you know, and maybe maximizing profits, or the old institutions of capitalism, they're not the best suited for that. I know. Maybe we can talk about you know, I forget the word. You know, the antitrust issues, not with respect to money, but with respect to data. In antitrust about data, not about money that comes out of data. But that's a different concern altogether.
Lara, Nicolette, any final thoughts?
I think I'm most excited by seeing the ways in which the current COVID pandemic has pushed so many researchers out of their comfort zone of just doing research with that sort of long eye to publication, and instead push them to think about, how can I transition this into practice? How can I help make this impactful right away? And so I'm interested in the sustainment of that spirit, where we're thinking about, you know, whatever gets us tenure, but also what can matter for society right away, and thinking about building those relationships, so, and finding the group, so that, as Nicolette says, the business cards have already been exchanged. And the sustainment, I think, is going to be the real challenge. So where do we put the resources so that relationships and trusted resources exist?
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think it was, yeah, I felt there was kind of a window of opportunity, like around March and April, where everybody was really collaborating, and it was amazing the amount of collaboration with different types of people. You know, I know, again, from my own perspective of contact tracing, you know, I've been talking to people that you know, I didn't imagine that I would talk to in a free way. It's just, you know, getting on Zoom and sharing information about, just let's get it done. And it was amazing, and it did get a lot, but it did subside, you know, somehow, you know, maybe it lasted a month or two, and that's it. And there is a little bit of the spirit still left, and there's maybe the sweet memories that, you know, actually it can be done. Maybe we can capitalize on that, but you know, how to sustain it, I don't know. It's a great question. Maybe it's another research in of itself, how to have this, you know, the sociology, psychology of this.
I think that spirit of collaboration that is born out of that urgency that then kind of very quickly dissipates is something we see during catastrophic events. But that's exactly why we can't wait until the catastrophic events happen to build these processes in place, because we need to make sure that that mechanism allows for, when people are talking to each other, willing to share information and do whatever needs to be done, they've got to be able to plug into something quickly to do that, so we don't lose that momentum. But I also think there's a space for us to think about what needs to exist beyond us and beyond this. And I think Laura's touched on that, and Emma's touched on it, and Ren as well. But I'm really curious to explore, not just for beyond the, you know, this COVID pandemic, but beyond the recovery. Like when we start to think about beyond the response, we're still in that point of kind of an immediate response. If we're really being honest, we still got to get through a recovery phase. And we are going to need to be able to enable and incentivize and support collaboration in ways that are not normal to people when things seem fine or stable. So how do we take whatever we can create here and use that as the impetus to say, we've got a long recovery ahead of us and we haven't even started there yet. So how do we actually create mechanisms that sustain that for the long haul? Because really, we're talking about decades of recovery, and we're going to need to have all hands on deck to be able to do that well.
I think that's a great place to wrap up here, Nicolette. Thank you. That's exactly what we're hoping to do with these sessions, is at least for one small part of the community, begin growing out the dialogue and discussion about how to stand up something that is can be extended when we need it and is still there when we don't feel we need it, but it's still there. So Emma, Laura, Nicolette, Ron, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great kickoff to the discussion, and I'm sure it's going to lead to a whole host of other interesting discussions in the roundtable that's going to follow. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.